Kia ora. I'm excited to be here today with a panel of business experts to explore our changing economic landscape and the priority issues for New Zealand business leaders. Of course, what you'll really want to know is how to navigate those issues. So I'll be looking for practical tips for business leaders from our lineup of BDO experts today. I'm joined by advisory partner Kimberly Simon. Thanks for joining us, Kim.
Kia ora.
Risk and consulting partner Taranesh Singh. Good to have you here, Taranesh.
Hello.
And our eye on tax, Ian Craig. Good to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
Fueling our conversation are the newly released findings of BDO's 6-monthly Business Wellbeing Index. Importantly, the latest report offers the first in-depth perspective into business leader sentiment since the general election. Now, Kim, I want to come to you first. What is this latest report telling us about both business performance and business leader wellbeing?
So our most recent survey was undertaken in the 2 weeks immediately following the general election. And we've seen a real shift in terms of our WHO5 index up to 74 from 63 in our April report. So we're really seeing that sense of hope coming through from business leaders. However, in the past 6 months, we're still seeing business financial measures still really coming through as being an issue impacting their well-being.
What factors do you think are influencing that renewed optimism? Is it solely down to the results of the general election?
Look, not solely. I think the general election really has played a big part here. Business leaders really feeling that hope, that sense of optimism around certainty coming through from government policy moving forward. We've also had, of course, commentary through from the Reserve Bank on interest rates. However, we do still have inflation in the mix there as well. So those business financial challenges do remain. So those concerns around cash flow, profitability, they're still in play, followed up by economic factors, so inflation, interest rates, those things surrounding business leaders that they're needing to deal with in their day-to-day lives. Supply chain issues still are a real issue, although we've seen, of course, shipping, it's easier to get things to New Zealand, but getting that stock level right is quite difficult. Workloads also still too high, and the cost of compliance. And I think Ian's going to talk to this more in terms of tax in a moment, but it's still taking business leaders quite a lot to meet their compliance obligations.
On compliance, certainly compliance costs and the idea of tax legislation is on the mind of business leaders at the moment. Specifically on tax, that was a very key election issue throughout the campaign. So I guess it's not surprising to see this as a key concern for business leaders at the moment, right?
No, absolutely. We saw coming through in our previous surveys as well that the compliance that business leaders are facing was immense. It was increasing, and that was having a real impact on their well-being. What we've seen throughout the election is commentary through from both National and ACT around cutting that red tape. I think business leaders are seeing that with that change in government should come with a real lightening of that load.
If that's everything that happened before the election then let's look forward to perhaps into 2024. What are business leader expectations of their business performance and well-being looking ahead?
Look, business leaders across New Zealand, we've seen from our recent surveys, they're always more hopeful about the future. Yes, things might be hard now, but looking forward 6 months, again, we're seeing things are more hopeful. However, those same issues still come into play. So business economic pressures, cash flow constraints, and general financial concerns.
And are there any specific sector trends that you're seeing which may change over the next 6-month period too?
Yeah, look, not unexpectedly, retail are really suffering. I think we've got that cost of living crisis in play, which is really starting. There's less people going into the shops. Retail is still suffering, and the well-being of those business leaders is lower than in other industries. Agri is also facing a lot of uncertainty, particularly around milk prices and things like that. So looking forward, however, retail look a bit more optimistic than agri. Agri is still looking forward and seeing quite a dark picture at the moment.
Thanks so much, Kim. I'm going to come back to you just in a moment to get some key tips for how business leaders can navigate all of those issues you've just spoken about. But now I'd like to bring you in here, Taranesh, to talk about your insights. So there's been a lot of change in the market this year and a lot of risks for businesses to grapple with. Weather was a major one, the floods, the tail end of the pandemic still an issue, challenging economic conditions as Kim's spoken about, geopolitical tensions certainly at the fore at the moment. How are businesses coping with all of that?
That's a great question. I think like most or all years in this decade, 2023 has definitely thrown up a lot of challenges as well. It seems to be par for the course. all of those issues that you just mentioned, particularly starting with the pandemic as that real initial hard shock for everyone around the world. What we've seen since then over the last couple of years is this concept of cascading and intersecting risks. It's a case of, we had the initial shock of the pandemic and the immediate dealing with those challenges. That then led into supply chain issues and restrictions in getting goods and services. We then had a talent shortage with borders remaining closed for longer periods of time. You fast forward through 2021, we then have skyrocketing interest and inflation. And all of that's coming together. And I think what we're seeing across our clients and across the general market is that businesses are feeling fatigue. Businesses and their business leaders. As I mentioned, we had and are still in many parts of the economy facing significant talent shortages. That's placing a lot of strain and a lot of disruption on organizations. And business leaders are, they're struggling with that challenge to really manage it. The last few years, all compounding up to where we find ourselves today, they're tired, they're fatigued, and I think that's understandable. But look, there is hope on the horizon. There are things to be positive about. With perhaps the exception of climate change, we've seen all of these risks before. We've dealt with them. Perhaps, not every business, but as an economy, as a business community, we have. So there are tools and people out there that can help.
So with so much for business leaders to think about at the moment, what are the main risks that you think that they should be looking out for?
That's a great question. Certainly all of the things that we just touched on. But earlier on this year, what we did is our annual piece of work around taking the temperature of business leaders and really finding out what are the key issues that they're facing, what are they most concerned about. And the results that came back were quite clear. The economic climate, so particularly an economic slowdown and a slow recovery off the back of that is top of mind for business leaders. We also have quite a concern around cyber risk and cyber crime. Fraud, that's also a key issue. It's crept back into the sort of top tier of risks that business leaders and owners are concerned about. And then, of course, we've got the climate issue. This is something that's been gathering momentum over the past few years. Look, there are a few differing opinions out there, but I think for me personally, it's pretty clear that this is a significant challenge that is sitting at the foot of businesses, and they do need to take action on as well.
Thanks so much for your insights, Taranese. Now, Ian, I want to come to you on tax. And the election campaign, as we know, saw a huge amount of focus placed on a large amount of tax matters. In your mind, what are the major changes that are going to happen over the next year in the tax landscape?
Yeah, well, I can't remember a recent election where there has been so much interest in tax and talking about tax in the election. So it was a significant element of the campaign. What we can expect is a mini budget in December. And I would expect most of the national tax policies that National campaigned on to be implemented then. That's in relation to personal tax cuts, which is a movement in the middle income thresholds for the different tax rates. The changes or the unwinding of some of the Labour-initiated changes to property, residential properties, which I think will be a boon to mum and dad investors who've invested in an extra residential property as part of their building funds for retirement. There'll be a potential change in commercial depreciation on commercial buildings. And then there's the unwinding of things like the EV rebate, the fuel taxes and that sort of stuff. So there'll be a lot in that budget because a lot of those changes need to be in legislation by 1 April 2024 or 1 July 2024. And if they don't bring them in legislation in December, they won't be passed in time.
Oh, so it's a very short list then, by the sounds of it.
Well, I'm sure they've been working on the changes that need to be made in the background. And it'll be interesting to see if there's any modifications once that they've been in and had a good look at the books, or whether the coalition talks have changed any of that landscape as well.
Specifically on that, do you think that the coalition talks could put any of those tax potential policies at risk?
Yeah, I think that National campaigned heavily on their tax policy, so they'll be reluctant to give things away. Two things that might be of interest would be, will the commercial depreciation on commercial buildings be unwound, or will there be a wind back in R&D tax credits, which have been going for the last few years? That was something ACT campaigned on to get rid of it. And in 2010, when National came in against Labour, they unwound the previous R&D tax credit regime there. So there's a bit of history there. So I'm watching that with interest.
Certainly lots to watch.
Yeah.
The BDO Index shows that 25% of business leaders say that compliance matters, including tax is one of those, are causing them to feel less mentally healthy than normal in their business lives. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a sense of ever increasing amounts of disclosure and ever increasing changes that are made. That I think any time there's a tax change, it usually brings in complexity or uncertainty, which then creates problems for business leaders. I think in the forms of increasing disclosure, we've seen that with the increased disclosure rules on trusts, the requirement to provide financial statements. We're seeing in international businesses, we're seeing a lot more disclosure around transparency between how the profit is calculated in New Zealand compared to other countries. And that all adds on to extra questionnaires to be completed, extra information to be provided. And there's no relief for the cost of doing that. You can't do it you've got to add it on to the cost of complying with the business. And so it just adds to that complexity, uncertainty, and it takes away time and resource. Business leaders and business owners want to do what they do best, which is concentrate on their business. And any time they have to spend more time on compliance matters, they're not really making the boat go faster, to use a Team New Zealand expression, or making their business thrive. So I think that taking away of their focus from the business to comply with government regulations, whether it's tax or other areas, has an impact, or a negative impact.
Two things that we can't avoid in life: death and taxes.
Well, yep, I made a career out of it.
Are there any of those tax compliance matters that you're really seeing your business clients focused on at the moment?
My tip to companies is always to try and stay on top of their compliance, right? So, file your GST returns, file your PAYE, get your tax returns in time, manage your provisional tax, manage your use of money interest. That's all becomes a bit more challenging. There's lots of options there. Where we see businesses getting into trouble is on PAYE and GST, and that's a really no-no, because that's funds that are held in trust. So it's like a fiduciary responsibility, because you're collecting it on behalf of the government. And if they fall behind in that because cash flow, they see it easier to drag out the inland revenue than go to the bank and get some more money. Real challenge for those businesses, and some risk to the directors. And we see the revenue prosecuting in the PAYE and GST area. I think the other aspect of PAYE, and it's a function of inland revenue being asked to do more and more things through the connection through payroll, is that additional complexity. And we're seeing a lot more firms outsourcing their payroll because they just can't cope. It takes too much of their time to try and pay their employees and comply with all the regulations that have to go with it.
Thanks so much, Ian. Great insights. Now, I have a question next for all of you. And there have been some really interesting takeouts from this November 2023 BDO Index, as we've all spoken about. But I want to know what resonates most with each of you from the survey results. Kim, perhaps you could tell us first.
Yeah, look, the results were not exactly a surprise. I spoke with a lot of clients in the lead up to the election, and they were looking for that change, that confidence that they would get from more certainty around government policy. But I think also not a surprise is that those business financial measures are still creating quite an issue in terms of business leaders' well-being. So getting some really clear measures in place to make sure they're managing their business financial pressures is really important, and we'll be sharing some tips around that shortly.
Taranesh, key takeaway on the index for you?
Yeah, look, I'll add to what Kim said. There are a few messages in the results this time round, but overall, I think I'm pleased, because what we've seen is that uptick. Yes, things have been tough for business leaders over the past 6 months since our April survey, and likely they're going to continue on to 2024. But people are feeling more hopeful, and I think that's the start. In terms of the how, look, as I said earlier, there's a lot of help out there, and these are issues that we have faced before. So there are tools, there are techniques, and I think, what does that look like? It really just starts with understanding where you're heading as an organization, what your strategy is, and then what are your key risks, your strategic sort of key issues and challenges that you need to focus on over the next 12 to 24 months.
Ian, it sounds like for you that the index results were certainly reflective of what you were hearing from your clients too.
Yeah, sure. I find that look, the fact that compliance keeps coming up every year is a bit of a surprise, because there has been some good things that have happened through the Inland Revenue's new interaction, MyIR, where there's a lot more tax information which is pre-populated, which makes your compliance easier. But they keep adding extra layers or extra complexity to it. And the property changes that were made to non-deductibility of interest and the bright line test and various other things, all added to real concerns for people. And the of course, when the trustee rate last year was announced to go to 39%, that's created a lot of uncertainty for clients, because that will come in at 1 April 2024. And I think there's going to be a review of dividend policies that need to be looked at to whether they can pay dividends out to their trusts before 31 March at that 39% tax rate. So I think there's still some tax always just occupies people's minds.
Well, a good tip there for businesses too. So I think I'd like to ask all of you for your tips for business leaders at the moment. Kim, I'm sure you have some good ones up your sleeve. What would your top tips be at the moment?
I think first I'd like to start by touching on a point that Taranish made earlier around strategy. So we've had a dramatic change in our landscape over the past couple of years. We've had COVID, and now we've got a change in government. So it's important that business leaders sit down and really focus on their strategy, look to make sure that they're still in touch with what the reality is. What is their vision? How are they going to get there? And really analyse their business strengths, potential weaknesses, and where the opportunities may sit, and where their weaknesses are. So that's first and foremost. But again, touching on those business financial measures, really important to focus on their cash flow. So that's both in terms of, in the short term, can they afford to pay their bills? Have they got enough money in their bank account? But also looking ahead to see where those drops in cash may come from, making sure they've got that close relationship with their bank and they've got those levers they can pull to make sure they're kind of getting through those holes in cash. The other thing that came through in the index was around workload. So making sure business leaders are effectively making that juggle work. Are there things that they can hire people for? Should they be outsourcing, or are they better to be done by employees or by themselves? And making sure they've got that balance right. I think managing stock is also really important at the moment. So we saw supply chain coming through quite clearly over past surveys. That's still an issue, but it's a difficult juggle, because you have to be able to map out what your sales may be in order to know what you might need to buy. So there's a real danger of overdoing it. So a lot of tips there.
A lot of great tips too. And I think really important as well is on that sort of load, that workload. And Taranish, perhaps you have some of your top tips on how to handle that mental load, especially with managing all of those risks that you've spoken about.
Yeah, of course. Look, I think it starts with seeking out help. There's plenty of people out there that can help, and that could be across the board table. That could be peers in the industry, and of course your professional advisors. Reach out to your accountant, reach out to your lawyers. There are people there that have seen these challenges before, and they have solutions to help. In terms of the what, look, I think it really, over the next little while, the key focus has to be on governance, risk management, and then getting the right process and control across your business and throughout your business. Kim's touched on a lot of those things already. And one point that I'll underline that she said is about that workload and making sure that not just yourself as a business leader or owner, but also your people throughout the organization are not overstretched, because you're not going to get the best out of people. In terms of process, it depends on the specifics of your strategy and then the risks that stand between you and achieving that strategy. Climate is one that we touched on. Where would I start? Look, start pretty simply by where are we today, baselining, and carrying out a really simple materiality assessment. What's most important to us? Where do we want to get to with the climate agenda? It's not for every business to solve every element of that, but what levers can they pull, make a plan, and then it's about, just one step after the other.
Great tips. Thanks, Taranesh. And I think certainly everyone will be looking forward to those Christmas holidays coming up as well. Ian, I want to come to you because obviously there's still a lot of water to come under the bridge with this changing government until we get to those enjoyable Christmas holidays. What are your top tips on how business leaders should navigate this changing government and what's going to happen when we do have a new government in place?
Well, in tax, unfortunately, the devil is always in the detail. So until you see the actual legislation in December, that you can't really make a lot of decisions. But my tips at the moment would be, look, dividend policy, which I mentioned before, paying it out before 31 March if it's going to a trust, before the trustee rate goes to 39%. There is some warnings that come with that because we saw in Land Revenue Review a lot of dividends that were paid out before the personal tax rate went to 39%. And so there'll be words of warning around, is it appropriate? Does your dividend policy fit in with your company culture and past dividend policies? And do you have the cash to pay it out to the trust? The property changes will be important. It comes up in probably a couple of areas. The unwinding of the non-deductibility of interest is not instant. It's phased out over a couple of years, so you won't be getting back to 100% deduction for a couple of years, and it's due to apply from 1 July 2024, not 1 April, which is the traditional start to the tax year. If you're having to sell property at the moment and you are subject to the Bright Line test at 10 years, one of your challenges is that you can't just simply sign a contract now and defer settlement until after 1 July 2024, when it will be back to 2 years. And that's because of the way the legislation determines when the Bright Line finishes. So you can't sign any contracts really now. So if you're having to sell land, and it's owned by a trust, sell it before 31 March. Otherwise, you're paying an extra 6%. If you're a business with lots of property, commercial property, you're going to have to assess the potential impact of the lack of tax depreciation going forward and what that does to your business. And then the final one is really, just stay on top of your compliance and get it right first time. And sometimes you need to get some advice to make sure you do.
Thanks so much, Ian. Some great practical tips for business leaders in there. Kim, I want to come to you last. Where can business leaders go to for support?
So first off, you can go to our website where you'll find more information around the index and also further tips, a lot of which we've shared with you today. The other piece is to get in touch with your trusted advisor. Make sure you're asking them for help and to access mental wellbeing resources as well, a lot of which you will see on your screen.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thanks, Taranesh and Ian. It was a very insightful chat. So thanks so much, everyone, for your time.
A pleasure.
Thank you.